So I have this theory, and I'm going to call it tennis ball theology. And here's what it is. In your lifetime, you will have about $1.7 million pass through your hands. Or stated in tennis ball currency, about 1,000 tennis balls. Now, the issue is, there's 1,000 tennis balls in here, all representing 1,700 each. So now think about this with me for a second. God has set something up to work a certain way, right? God owns it all. They're all his tennis balls. He's the God of the tennis ball factory, right? And so when you look at all that God has done, what God wants is, he could have took the 10% already. Do you believe that? I mean, do you think it's like, I tricked you, God, you know? He could have gave you 90, but it's an issue of faith, and so he gives you all 100 and says, now what will you give me back? And what he wants is 10%. So God wants about 100 tennis balls. And the hard thing is, sometimes people say, well, I'll give the leftovers. I mean, God, I have some bills to pay. Do you think it's God's fault that you have bills to pay? Or people say, well, you know, I don't know, you know, I'm gonna wait and see. Wait and see for what? Disobedience now is just as bad as it would be if you waited 2 weeks, and it's just as bad as it has been. God set up a certain thing to work a certain way. And when it works a certain way, we just do what God says. So God says, I just want what's due me, and I want you to give it to me. You see, notice, like I could have a thing and just open it, it falls out, but God's like, no, I'd rather you put the tennis balls in. Back to God. It's giving back. He gave it, and I'm a steward of it. I don't own anything, right? So all I'm doing is giving him back 10%. If I was God, I'd be telling me, you live on 10, I'll take 90. You know, I mean, but God says, no, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to give you all 100, and will you give me back 100 tennis balls? Will you give God, I mean, can I ask, is it reasonable that God is giving you so much and he only wants this back? Let me ask you, is it reasonable? Some of you are like, I don't know, man, you're really weird. How does tennis balls have anything to do with anything? And for some of us, the tennis balls just represent, you know, for a lot of us, 1.7 million is not even the starting place. And, you know, I believe, because people say, well, you know, tithe, for those of you, let me just go ahead and tell you now so you don't email me. The word tithe does not appear in the New Testament, clue phone. But Jesus talked about money more than he talked about anything else. In the Old Testament, the breaking of the commandment was do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery. That was the law. In the New Testament, under the covenant of grace, God says, if you even look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Now I ask you, did God in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, was the bar raised or lowered? It was raised. Murder. Don't murder someone. But in the New Testament, it says if you have anger against a brother, you've murdered them in your heart. Now I ask you, in the New Testament, did God raise the bar or lower the bar? He raised the bar. So why would we think in the area that God talks about the most that he would lower the bar? And people say, well, I'm tithing 5%. No, really, you're tipping. I mean, you know, you might not like me, but at least you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free, and I don't know what to do. I'm just telling you the truth. If you say, well, we're working up to it. I don't think work up to it's what God wants. I mean, can you think obedience? If your kid's like, well, Dad, I'm working up to obeying you. And for 7 days a week, you know, you want me to do the right thing. But Dad, only a day a week, I'll do whatever I want. Okay, son, as long as you give me 6 days. You follow me? Delayed obedience is disobedience. I ask it again. Is this reasonable? God's given 100%, wants 10 back, minimum. I would say to some of us as Christ followers, you've been here for a long time, it's time to step it up. Because maybe your faith is not where it was when you first originally tested God in this. And again, I'll tell you, what I love about this message today, God has provided for this church in amazing ways, and I hope we never have to beg for money. One thing we'll never do, we're not going to do spaghetti dinners, and we're not going to put thermometers on the walls, and we're not going to do fundraisers. Because frankly, that just violates this. God set the system up. I'll ask it again. Is this reasonable? It's reasonable, right? What's preventing you then from today beginning to do what God has said? Can you be honest with God? You're having a divine interaction right now. Some of you are very interrupted at the moment in your heart. What will you do? Say yes or no is the only thing. You get that choice. Now, in Living Hope, I've had pastors tell me this, and it's kind of cool because they get to tell me what they think, and that's all right. Average American tithes, they call it tithe, gives 2% of their income to the local church. Do you think that's right? 2%. God set something to work a certain way. And in essence, we've stolen from God. Living Hope. %1 is what we give to God as a church. Let me ask it again. Is that reasonable what God wants? Is this acceptable? Friends, I just got to tell you, this might be the hardest thing you ever hear, but it's only through truth that you'll be set free. Truth here does not set you free. It's truth here that sets you free. And God will always provide for Living Hope. Again, this is not about condemning wealth. This is about what you do with wealth that's condemned. What you have is not yours. And what God wants back is a starting place of 10%.